Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed, the podcast where we dive into the highs, lows, and did that really just happen moment of parenting teens and young adults. We're Carrie and Jessica, parent coaches, mythbusters, and occasional referees in the battle of hormones versus common sense.
If you've ever wondered, is this just happening to me? You're not alone. We're here to help you with real talk, expert advice, and hopefully a few laughs along the way. Need more support? We also offer private coaching, workshops, and speaking engagements because sometimes even parents don't have all the answers.
So continue listening as we tackle this parenting journey together.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed. Hi, Carrie.
Hey there. How you doing?
Well, interesting question. How am I doing? It's summer here now, and I guess by summer I mean school's out. I have a rising senior, and summer should be a time of relaxation and all the decompressing from the school year. However, I feel when you have a rising senior that it's not necessarily the case because we have to start prepping for college applications. So we got to talking about this and we realized that really college prep should be starting way before senior year. So we dove into our resources and Carrie found a really good one to help us navigate the challenges of college applications. Carrie, introduce us to our guest.
So this is Stephanie Ordet. She is my friend. She is a professional in college advising and the mom of twin boys that are now 24 years old. And she's navigated this process herself as a parent, but also as a college advisor. So we thought it would be a fun conversation to have her on and answer all of our questions and our listeners' questions about what should we be doing, and specifically Jessica here.
Yes, I have a lot.
Having a one-on-one.
Even though it's my third time, I still have a lot. So welcome, Stephanie.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
Have you?
Yes. Well, welcome. We're so excited for you to be here. So let's start there. It's summer. And I don't mean just summer as a rising senior, but what should we be advising our kids to do over the summer of their high school careers? Is it okay to just sit back and relax? I know some kids still go to sleepaway camp. In terms of a college resume, what do you suggest?
I don't think there's any one answer to that question. I think a lot of those types of questions are child specific. So it depends on a number of factors. If a child is one that is unsure of maybe what they want to study and they have some ideas and they're not sure, there's a lot of summer college exploration programs that are a good way to go about doing that. Sometimes kids know that, look, I want to be pre-med and they are interning or shadowing doctors over the summer or doing volunteer work. Some kids are going to sleepaway camp. My boys went to sleepaway camp up until, well, my one son was there, is still there now at 24 years old working. My other son went through 10th grade and then stopped. Sometimes it just depends on the kid. I think that any option is good as long as they're busy personally. I think for me, I'm not one to let my kids kind of just lounge around for the summer, but they do need some time to decompress and have that like switch off of school for a little bit. I do believe that that's important to give them some time to rest and relax. I mean, school's stressful, especially for those juniors, you know, with the testing and the AP tests and the rigor of their classes and the SATs and all of that. So I really do think it's student specific. I don't think there's one straight answer as to what they should be doing over the summer. And I also think that possibly by different grades, it would be different activities. You know, I think that it's more important in some grades to be doing college readiness activities than others. So I think it's definitely specific to what grade they're entering and what their ideas and goals and aspirations may be.
Okay. I think that's fair.
Can you give us a little background? Did you start doing college advising before your boys were
So
in
how I got
process
into
or
this,
yeah.
when my kids were going through the process, of course, like most high school students or all kids, they don't think their parents know anything. And I wasn't doing this at the time, but I had a lot of friends who were not from the United States and weren't familiar with the college process.
Hmm.
And my boys were in ninth grade and it was time to sign up for the PSATs at school. So I gave them the money and they went and signed up and they took the test. And one of my friends called me and she said, "What was that test you signed up your kids for?" She had no idea what the PSATs were or any of these things because, like I said, she didn't go to college in the States.
Right.
So I explained it to her. And then during my kids' 4 years of high school, I felt like I was providing a lot of guidance to friends that weren't and didn't know what to expect and things like that. And I had my kids work with a advisor pretty closely, probably starting in 11th grade. Although I do see the value of starting earlier, I was also very involved at their school. So I knew course progression and rigor. And I had older parents who had been through the process before helping guide me in that time. When my kids went off to college, I actually had become very close friends with the college advisor that they used and started with him editing essays for other students.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I realized that this was something that I really enjoyed doing and went back to UCLA and did a extension course in college advising and was fortunate enough to get my first client and just kind of grew from there.
Your client is coming to you with a certain set of information on their resume. Do you then look for schools to help match them to based on what their resume says? Or do you listen to what schools they want to go to and help them tweak
Okay.
their resume to fit what that school is looking for?
It's a conversation with the student. So when I first meet with the student, the first thing that I do, whatever grade that they're in, I do an intake, right? So I'm going to talk to them about what classes they're currently taking, what classes they're set to take next year if they've already done course selection, what activities they've done, what their interests are, if they know they want to study, and what if they've done any testing yet. So I try and gather all of this information. And then I also ask them if they have any schools already that they're interested in, or they have any parameters. I used to have like a questionnaire that I would give them of like big school, small school, but I found that most kids don't really know.
Mhm.
They're not looking for one kind of school. They're kind of looking at a range of different types of schools. I mean, I do get the kids that want the big sports, rah, rah.
Right.
Some kids don't care. They're willing to look at all different ones, but I feel like a conversation is better, that has been working better for me than having a questionnaire, because sometimes they write things down on the questionnaire that aren't consistent with what they're telling me. So
Okay.
we go through that process, and sometimes the kids have resumes and sometimes they don't. And I will help them develop a resume, but we work together to develop that list. So sometimes they have schools and sometimes they don't. And if they have schools that I think they'll be a good fit for, then I am honest with them and tell them that. But if a student came to me and she had a list of schools and there was, let's say 12 schools on her list and 10 of the schools were reach schools. And I said, I think we need to work on this list because your chances of getting into all these schools is not high just because they're reach schools for everybody. And so we try to work to create a balanced list. So more of what I do is not matching their resume to the school, but to try and find schools that give them a mix of a list that's reach schools, target schools, and what they now call likely schools instead of what we used to call them was safety schools, but now
Right.
they're called likely schools for some reason. So I try and average a list of 12 to 15 schools. I do see some students, I've had students with 18 schools. I've had some students with 10 schools. It depends again on the student and the list of schools that they're looking at. And then we also take input, from the parents, obviously have parameters. I want my kid to stay close to home. I want them to stay in state. I don't care where they go, but I want them to be in this time zone or whatever my budget is this. So we work with all of those factors, the parameters that the parents provide, and then we come up with a list. And sometimes the parents have these parameters and then they say, oh, but let's add these schools anyway and see what happens. So, I work with the parents and the families and the students to try and give them my honest interpretation of the data that they have and tell them which schools I think they have better chances for. If a student's chasing merit money, they're going to have more luck in getting that merit money with the schools that are target and likely schools. That's where the most merit aid is going to come from. So it really depends on what the objective of the family is. One of the things I also do to start out that I think is important is just try and take the anxiety and stress from both the students and the parents. Your child has done all of this work to date, regardless of what type of student they are. There is a school out there for everybody, and I share that with all of my students and all of my parents. So that's kind of the first thing before we even get to that list, is to make them understand your kid's going to go to college. It might not be their dream school, and not everybody has a dream school, and there might be multiple dream schools for one child, and they're going to find where they feel, where after they apply and what they get into, they can go visit those schools. And sometimes they get to school and you know what? It's not the right choice and they can transfer. So
Right.
it's not a forever decision. You're not locked in, unless you do an early decision application, in which case then you are bound to that decision until you get to school. And at that point, if you're not happy, you can transfer. But that's kind of, I don't know if I answered your question or
Sure,
not, but
that's how you start
Yeah.
the process
Yeah.
of. So it's interesting. I think part of the reason that that term safety school may have given way to a likely list is because, is there even such a thing as a safety school anymore? I mean, what we would have considered that, a lot of people, the stories we are hearing is that people aren't getting into all the schools they thought they were a good fit for. Are you seeing that as well?
I am. And I do think that maybe that's the reason for the change in terminology.
Mhm.
Part of that probably brought on by the fact that with the Common App, you and test optional students are applying to more schools. So schools are businesses and they have institutional priorities and they're getting more applications than ever before. So somewhere like University of Florida had over 90,000 applications this year.
Mhm.
So they're not always looking at what the highest stat kids are or the highest this or that, but they're looking at what fits with their institutional priorities. And so a student with a 1580 and a 5.2 GPA might not be the right type of student that they're looking for that program. And so that's why students are getting turned away in these cases where maybe they thought that was a safety school before and now it's not. So I think that there's a couple different reasons why it's happening, but I think the combination of the Common App allowing students to apply to more schools and test optional,
Mhm.
more applications, schools can be pickier. And so therefore it's raising the bar in places where it may have been a little bit easier to get into before.
Sure, that makes
And
sense.
what are your recommendations for a student on the test optional school? Is it based on the student? Is it based on the school? Like, how do you navigate
So the first
that?
thing is we talk about where they are with testing. Have they tested? Do they plan to test? What's their test strategy? So I don't do test prep with them, but I have a number of people that I can refer them out to for testing, one-on-one tutoring or group sessions or however they want to do that. Once we have scores, if those scores align, so if you have a student that has, a 3.9 unweighted GPA and their test scores aren't comparable with their grades and the schools that they're looking at, we may then choose to apply test optional if those schools have test optional options. So it's going to be very specific again to the student, to their GPA, to what their test scores are, and if they're equivalent. So
Okay.
I find that it's hard to get a student that's equal across the board. I have students that have like a 34 ACT and maybe a lower GPA, and then I have students with like a 4.9 weighted GPA and a 27 on their ACTs. So when you have a balanced student, it's a little bit easier to make that recommendation. And then if the score falls within the median 50% for that school, I would always recommend sending it. There are cases when if the score is lower, I would still recommend sending it because without that data point, the schools don't have that data point. So sometimes they could infer that you have a lower score than what you have. So it might be better to send the score if it's, 50 points off of the 50% or even 100 points off. But if you have I had a student that had an 800 on her SATs one year, there was no way we were sending that score to any of her schools. And she got into the majority of the schools on her list without sending the score.
Okay.
The other thing that I do sometimes, if a student doesn't have strong test scores, but yet they have AP scores that are 4s and 5s, depending upon the university, we would send those because that gives the school another data point to evaluate the student's knowledge and rigor of the classes that they've taken. So it really depends. More schools are moving back to test required. This year, University of Miami moved back and a couple of other schools have moved back to being test required because they're finding that test scores are an indicator of success at their universities. Other schools believe that test scores are not an indicator of how a student will do at their university, and so they are remaining test optional. The other component with test optional, changing back and forth, is that, again, schools are businesses and applications are money coming into the school because each application costs anywhere from $50 to $80.
Right.
So let's say now I have 90,000 students applying at $50 a pop. And now I say, well, I'm test required. Maybe I'm not going to have as many students. Well, I'm going to lose out on some of that revenue, although it hasn't hurt any of the schools in Florida that are all test required and had 90,000 applications.
Right. That's
So
right.
I don't know that I have an answer for all of those things, but these are what we're hearing. These are the trends that I'm hearing about.
Well, this is like why a parent should have their student working with a college advisor, right? There would be no way for the average parent to just know this information and be able to guide their student.
No, it's too much
Right.
information to know. And also, not only that, but students, children, teenagers, young adults do better when they're working with somebody other than their parents. My son just graduated from grad school, and I had to hire somebody to help him with his grad school applications because he didn't want to work with his mom.
Right.
Kids don't want to be managed by their parents. They want to feel like they're being independent and that they're taking information and advice from experts in those fields and not from their parents who they believe don't know anything.
Well, it's funny. One of my girlfriends, when she was going through the process and hired someone to work with her daughter, what she said was, I valued my relationship with my child more than I valued the college application process, because
Right.
she didn't want to be the one nagging and did you do this yet, and and be the one responsible to say, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell, we forgot to send this in. And so she saw it as a way to save her relationship.
It does keep the relationship better between the parents and the children, I believe, because there's less stress. Because the other thing that students don't realize is that parents work behind the scenes of what the students are doing. So even though I'm meeting with the child, I'm also following up every meeting with an email, recapping my conversation and copying the parents. And I'm available for all of my parents to have phone calls with them individually outside of my meetings with the students, because I feel like when the parents have questions, and I don't want them nagging their students, I'd rather they call me. They're not nagging me. I understand. I'm a mom. When I was going through this process, I spoke to my kids' college advisor probably weekly during that rising senior fall time, because I needed to be talked down off of a ledge myself. It's stressful. It's overwhelming. And you know what?
Doing two at
he
one
was
time.
there for me.
Yeah.
And I was doing two at one time. And, so I think
they were very different too at one time.
Yeah. So I think that, I am there for the parents as well. And I think that's important for the parents to have a sounding board to say, does this make sense? Is my child doing this? And sometimes also the parents share with me things that the kids don't remember to tell me. I had a student last year who did really well on the SATs, and he was approached by College Board to be a peer tutor. And at first he was reluctant to do it and he didn't want to do it. And he hadn't told me about it, but the mom told me about it. So I said, oh, did anything, I brought it up as if I didn't know. And he shared it with me. And I explained to him why this would be a good opportunity for him. And he went and he tried. He was nervous about doing it. And he went and said it was one of the best experiences that he ever had, and how grateful he was that he tried to do it. And now he would consider tutoring other students going forward, or possibly being a TA in college. And so when the parents can share information with me, behind the scenes, it's valuable sometimes. My mom always said that, parents work behind, and the kids don't always know what their moms and dads are doing behind the scenes. And I think that having that input from the parents and me developing relationships with the parents too becomes very helpful in that regard.
Sure. You mentioned before the child who is undecided, who doesn't know what they want to study, so that doing things over the summer might help them explore what they might like. When it comes time to check that box on their application, and Carrie and I have discussed this before, it bothers me that at 17, that 18, however old they are, when they're checking that box, that they should know what they want to study in college. Now, I have 3 different experiences. My daughter was musical theater, my son was engineering, and my third has no idea what he wants to do. So how do you let a college know, just because I don't know what I want to do doesn't mean I don't have interests in so many areas? Is checking the undecided box a deterrent for colleges to look at you?
So a lot of schools are actually major blind when it comes to determining acceptance. So it's not necessarily held against a student if they don't know what they want to do. There are colleges that have that undecided box just for that reason. So a student has time to decide what they want to do. And even students that think they know what they want to do, over 60% of students change their major at least one time.
Yes.
I can speak from my own experience. I started out as an accounting major, took managerial accounting and said, oh my God, this is not for me. And I switched to finance. One of my boys started out as engineering, and at the end of freshman year, which he had to apply into because certain programs, because they're so rigorous, you have to apply into them and start. He realized at the end of freshman year that that wasn't the right choice, and he transferred out and moved into statistics and data science, which was a way better fit.
Okay.
So even kids that think they know, sometimes they don't know, and they get to school and they have a recognition that that's not the case. And then other times when you have to take your gen ed classes or the required classes, you learn about something that you would have never learned about before. And that is the interest that sparks your career. I remember personally, again, taking an art history class, and I loved it. And there was a part of me that said, oh my gosh, I'm going to minor in art history now because I thought this was so cool. So college is that time for exploration, although there are some majors that you do kind of have to decide going in that you want to be in them because you have to apply directly into those schools. In some cases, it's easier to transfer. It's not easy to transfer into those parts of the school, but it's easier to transfer out
of them.
So a student that doesn't know what they want to do, but may have multiple interests, what I would do during my discovery process would be to spend a session or two talking to them about what their interests are, if they have any ideas as to what they want to do. And then I do provide them, some samples of, like, if you major in this, here are your potential career options and outcomes of those different majors. And so we talk through those things. And at the end, if they're still undecided, then we put undecided. I always feel like it's important to be authentic to yourself when you're doing the applications. I don't encourage my students to pander to the schools and do what they think the school is looking for, because to be honest, we're not in the admissions office. We're not reviewing that file, and we don't know what the institutional priorities are. So if a student really doesn't know, then they don't know. And if they decide later on that they want to do engineering and they didn't get in there, then the school should work with them to figure out a way to make that happen once they're there. It's maybe harder. Maybe they don't finish in 4 years or things like that. And so that's a discussion from a parent and child standpoint, because it may cost more money at that point, but that's a discussion at that point in time.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And can you educate us on the differences between EA, ED, regular decision, and is one decision better than another? Or
Sure.
how does
So
it work?
early decision only is offered at certain schools. Majority of the schools that offer early decision are private universities, where you are saying, if you select, I'm going to apply here, and this is my number one choice, and I want to go here more than anything in the world, and if you accept me, I'm going. So when you submit that ED application, you are signing a contract with the school. You actually have to sign it. The parent has to sign it. And I believe the school counselor also has to send something that acknowledges that the student is applying early decision to that school, because it is a contract at that point. And so you are bound to that decision. Typically, students will do that for different reasons. One is they just think that's the school for them. Another reason is that a lot of schools, the acceptance rate is a few percentage points higher for those highly selective schools. There's a lot of schools that draw a lot from the early decision pool because they know then that those students are committed to going, and it protects the school's yield. So again, with the school being a business, if you have a pool of, let's say, 10,000 students that if you select 1,000 of these students, they're all coming and they're likely full pay students, it helps your class size. It already makes that part easier for the university.
Right.
So there are schools like Tulane, University of Miami, definitely pull a lot of students from their early decision pool, Northeastern, and then all of the other schools that have early decision. Definitely the acceptance rate is a few percentage points higher than it is during the regular decision pool, because there's less spaces and now there's more students applying, right? So if in early decision, let's say the school has 5,000 spots in total, and they know they're going to fill 2,000 of them with early decision students, and then that leaves 3,000 for the other 30,000 applications. Well, your acceptance opportunities are just less given the numbers.
When you apply ED, are you expected that you're going to pay in full? Are there any opportunities for
if a student has, so it depends on the school also. There are some schools that don't offer merit money. One of my boys went to Duke, and he was a national merit semifinalist. And I remember contacting them because he got accepted early decision. And that came with no merit money
No.
whatsoever. And I called them and I said, my son is this and that. And they said, well, everybody here is this
Everyone
and that.
is.
So no, thank you, but no. And knowing all of that at the time, I knew that if he had applied to Vanderbilt and gotten in, there was $5,000 for national merit automatically. If he had stayed in the state of Florida, there was Bright Futures plus whatever money he would have been offered. So different schools have different awards. The thing with applying for financial aid in early decision, you don't know what they're going to come back with. You can run the estimated calculator, but nothing's a guarantee. So if they come back with a lesser package and there's a gap between what you thought you were going to pay and what money you were going to get, now you have a problem. So I typically recommend that if a student is chasing merit money or looking for financial aid, that early decision is not necessarily the best path to take because it puts a little bit more stress on the family, potentially financially. So that's early decision. Early action is saying to the school, I really want to apply here and I want to apply earlier so I find out earlier. So most schools have an early action. Not every school has an early action. The deadlines for early action typically are October 15th or November 1st. Some of them are November 15th, but the large majority are November 1st.
Okay.
And basically you're just doing your application earlier so that you can find out sooner. I typically advise most of my students to do the early action when it's accessible to them. In cases possibly where they're testing later into their senior year, or we need their strong mid-year grades to help boost their GPA, I would possibly at that point suggest that they go into that regular decision pool. But I typically try to advise them to do the early action because also then they're getting this out of the way. Like they're getting the applications over with instead of having it linger through all of senior year and be working on applications and essays and all of this stuff. They finally can breathe a little bit and then they're just waiting, which is, stressful in a different way, but at least they've done all that they can do and then it's out of their hands. So that's another way. And then there's regular decision, which is basically just a later date and time. There are some other variations of these things. So there's something called restricted early action, which like Stanford has and a couple other schools have, which is different than ED. It's like you can apply there, but you can't apply to any other private universities at the same time. So there's other nuances in this, but these are the most typical and most popular options. Also, some schools will have different dates for in-state and out-of-state residences. UCF and Florida State do an October 15th deadline for in-state priority applications. University of Florida does not. Other UNC does an October 15th early action deadline for everybody, but there are some schools out of state that have different deadlines. And again, I can't rattle them all off at the top of my head because there's just so many, but yeah.
But University of Florida, this was their first year that they put early action.
This is the first year that they put early action. And so the thought is with these early action applications that you're finding out sooner. So you're finding out in December, January, and February instead of finding out in maybe March and April to give you more time to make a decision by the May 1st commit deadline. And now what is happening though is that because they're getting so many students applying, sometimes schools can't get through all the applications by the time that they said they were going to notify the students. So last year, University of Texas only got through like 5% of their early action applications and literally deferred the remaining pool to the regular decision pile because they didn't have enough staff to cover all of the applications that they received.
Did the students know that that's the reason why, or they just think it's a flat out deferral? And
I don't remember when it happened, which way that went. I don't remember.
Okay.
And is there any other than finding out early? Do you think that, or do you know if a large percentage of acceptances come from the early action as well?
Schools will say that there is not much difference, but I do believe there probably is some. They don't have stats on admissions between early action and regular decision.
Okay.
To share like they do with early decision. The other type of admission that I do want to mention is rolling admissions. So there are some schools that basically open up either July 1st or August 1st, and they take the applications and review them and will get back to you in 6 to 8 weeks. So schools that have that really gaining popularity, University of Alabama is a rolling admissions school, University of Mississippi, Mississippi State, many other schools have rolling admissions. And for those schools, we try and get those applications in as soon as possible in the process, because again, thinking about, let's say I have 1,000 spaces, if I get my application in sooner, there's still 1,000 spaces. But if I wait until November, now there's only, let's say, 800 spaces, and schools get more selective as the spaces dwindle sometimes.
Right.
So I always advise when I'm working with my students, we tackle the list by rolling admissions October 15th, November 1st, and then everything else beyond that.
How important is the Common App essay?
The personal statement is your students' really only opportunity to speak in their voice, to share something that's not already provided by their transcript, their counsel report, or their test scores. So I believe it's very important because it's the only time where the school is evaluating the voice of the actual student, where they are looking to learn more information about the student to either confirm something that they showed in their resume, on their application, on the activities list, or they're looking for more information on the student. And so really that's the one place where they can get that. Now, with that said, with AI, some schools are actually giving less weight to the essay, or they aren't scoring the essay because they understand that students are using AI, even though they should not be using AI.
Right.
So it's not a
You
real
can tell when an essay,
representation of their.
well, you can tell when an essay is AI because there's nothing personal in the essay. There's no details about the student, right?
Okay.
AI can be good to help generate ideas for a student that isn't working with an essay coach or a college advisor, but using AI to generate your whole essay, college admissions offices have software that they can run. They can tell if it's AI generated. They read different. They don't read the same way. They want to hear about the student in the student's voice.
Right.
And the best way to do that is to write the essay yourself. And if you don't have a college advisor or an essay coach, at least have your parent take a look at it. Have an English teacher take a look at it. Have somebody just go over it one time and proofread it, if not for just grammatical and spelling mistakes, at a minimum. So, I think the essay is very important. It's your only opportunity. It's your 600 words to make a case for something that is relevant in your life that may or may not already be on your application. And then the supplemental essays that come from the schools are the same thing. They want to hear, a lot of schools ask, why do you want to go here? And they want to know why you want to go here, or whatever they're asking. A lot of times the supplemental essays will reflect what the school's values are. And so they want to know how you will fit into the values that school has. So if you look at like Michigan supplemental essays, tell me about a community that you're a part of outside of whatever, or University of Florida tells me about your most important extracurricular activity. If you go onto their website and read about the schools, you're also going to see those things reflected back in their websites. Duke is another one. They are looking for authenticity. They are looking on how you're going to contribute to the overall Duke community. And you can read all of that. If you go onto their website, it's right there. So they want to answer, how are you going to contribute? What are you going to do? How are you going to make these universities a better place? They're looking to understand all of that information, and they want to hear from the students.
When a senior is faced with these supplemental essays, do you recommend looking at the school's website first to try and align with their values?
I always recommend, as part of our school research, that they're going, if they can't, some students visit a lot of the schools during their sophomore and junior year. Not all students either do that or have the ability or even had the schools on their list before. If you're looking to apply to an early decision school, I will not let you apply personally unless you've gone and stepped foot on the campus and walked around.
Right.
And I want you to also have gone on the website and done research and looked at stuff about the academic programs that you're interested in or the student life tabs. That information is always going to be valuable in the supplemental essays, especially the Y essays, because in the Y essays, you're going to want to talk about, I read about this teacher. I want to take this class. I'm interested in learning these things or doing research with this professor. I was there, at University of Maryland. I visited University of Maryland. I saw Testudo the turtle, and I saw how all the students touch him for good luck before tests. And I thought that was really, whatever it is, they want to know that you've taken an interest in their university enough to have done some research. It's similar to preparing for a job interview. You want to go in prepared, and they want to see that you're prepared and that you're not just sending them a cookie cutter, essay. And the other thing with the essays is, sorry to interrupt you, is that
no, I'm interrupting you. I apologize.
It's optional. There'll be a lot of times where the essays are notated as optional. There is really no such thing as an optional essay. You have to do the essays. This is not the time for optional. So
that's a great point.
Yeah.
So it's funny because my son did apply to Michigan, and I remember when he had that a question,
Yeah.
talk about a community that you belong to, and he did work with a college advisor, but we were brainstorming topics that he could write about. And he chose to write about he is in a community of middle children. Like he stands out because he started it by saying, I'm in a community with Peyton Manning, and he mentioned a couple of other people
Right.
that fell into that community of middle
Right.
children. I guess I was looking at it where they want to see your creative side, like
Yeah.
they want to see what you come up with. But what you're saying makes a lot more sense, that they want to see how you fit into their school.
Well, you know what? But I don't think that there's wrong answers either. I don't think his answer is wrong. I think it shows that he was thoughtful in reading the question and came up with something that resonated with him. My son wrote about his fantasy football community. So,
Okay,
they
so
all, it
right,
doesn't have to be something serious for them to admit you. They're just
right,
looking to learn something else about your personality. My favorite essays are the ones that don't regurgitate your resume, but
right.
tell me a story about something, maybe expand upon a subject on your resume, but tell me how you felt during that experience and give me that information. I like
One
those
of
better.
one of his I think I don't remember if it was Lehigh or Maryland, but one of them said, "Tell me what you did last Wednesday."
Right. That was Maryland. They have the fill in the blanks and they ask for like, tell me what you did last Friday night.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So, and he happened to have been with family, so he was able to write about the importance of, but those I like. I think those show a creative,
Yeah.
intellectual side that it gives you an insight into these kids that you don't
Mhm.
get from just writing down what score you got in a class,
Right.
what grade you
Yes. And
earned.
that's where the schools that do the holistic review of the application versus the schools that may not and are just stat focused, you
Can you
see a
talk
difference
about
in the
that?
applications.
Talk about a holistic view.
So, what schools talk about when they talk about a holistic review is that they are talking that they look at the whole application. So, they aren't just looking at the SATs or your test, SAT, ACT scores, and your GPA. They are looking at you in context of your whole self. I actually just attended a webinar over the weekend that from University of Texas, and they gave 3 examples of students all around the same test scores within a point or two on the ACTs, all around the same on their GPA. One had a dip in 10th grade, but when they went through the counselor report on that student, they learned that the one of the siblings had passed away. And that's
Oh
why
my
he had a
gosh.
dip in grades in 10th grade. And then in 11th grade, his grades came back. And so that showed, and the counselor wrote this recommendation that the student was one of the most resilient students that they've ever
Mhm.
had. And so his grades were lower than the other students because of this dip. But, that they didn't at the end talk about which student they would
Student page.
accept. But to me, I would accept the student that was more resilient
Mhm.
Right.
than the student that had the other grades because resiliency is so important. But you get that information in a holistic review versus a school that's not reading the information or doesn't collect any other information. And sometimes they do it just because they have so many applicants, they don't have another way of doing it, or the school is less selective. Doesn't mean that it's less rigorous in the school, but just their application process is just less selective. So they go by
Mhm.
the numbers, but one of the things this guy mentioned, who is the head of admissions it was actually at Georgia, excuse me, was that high test scores and high grades aren't always the students that they're looking for. That there in particular, they saw that the retention rates were higher for students that were a little bit lower in their test scores and grades. Why that is, he wasn't sure, but so different schools are looking for different things. They aren't all looking for students in the top 2% of their class. Other schools are looking for students that fall within that criteria. You always have you know, so it's just different from school to school, but that's why a holistic review allows for hearing about stories like that, as well as, understanding things that might have happened to the student. I had a
Mhm.
student that one year she had an 800 on her SATs. She didn't submit the scores, but she had worked 3,000 hours in high school in jobs.
Oh my gosh.
And she ended up getting accepted to University of Tampa with like a $40,000 a year scholarship because they saw her work ethic. So there are all different reasons why schools are looking to take students or provide money or whatever the situation is.
And I think that's a really good message for parents that are listening too, that try to highlight your child and your student and not just fit them into, one peg or place, right? And that's the benefit of working, with someone like Stephanie, is that they could see, the holistic, or your entire child, right? Not just their test scores and their GPA. Like, they're looking and bringing out other things about your student to highlight in the application process. So I mean, my children were very different students, very different boys, men, and really highlighted what their strengths, were. And, it was like, I still remember Ryan's essay, which was unique, I would think, for, a boy of his age. He started talking about the feelings he had when he first went to New York and Soho, like, because he was interested in design and clothing and that whole process. But he described the feelings that he had when he realized how much he was interested in clothing design. And even though
Hmm.
he applied to business entrepreneurship program, like, it was
Right.
so interesting. It was a really, like, interesting thought. And I did not come up with the idea.
But I think that's why the essay becomes important, because you get to hear all of those
Yes.
feelings and learn about the student in a different light.
Yeah.
A lot of my social media feed tends to be about essays, topics to stay away from. Don't write this, write this. As I'm beginning to think about my son preparing for his journey, are there really topics that they should stay away from? Or is the goal of the essay to be as authentic as you can be to show your true self?
First off, I should just mention that there are college advisors that do soup to nuts, including the essays. I tend to refer out to essay coaches because I feel like it's a whole area of expertise into itself. That
Okay.
said, as I mentioned, I do edit essays for another college advisor. And I've read and will help students that don't work with an essay coach. I will edit their essays, but I don't do the brainstorming sessions with them
Okay.
because it's too time intensive and I'm one individual. With that said, I typically prefer an essay that is not a regurgitation of their resume. I don't want to hear I did this and I did this and I did this and I did
Right.
this. Focus in on one thing that maybe is authentic to your resume. What you're looking for is like a central theme, and then how you can create all the like spokes off of that central theme. I did read one essay one time where a student talked about his parents' divorce and how that made him feel and how he was having feelings of suicide. And I shared this with the college advisor and I said, I don't think he should send this essay. And I also think you need to speak to his parents that he needs help,
Mhm.
Right.
because this was like a cry for help to me. So I wouldn't send something that's maybe so dark and gloomy like that in
Mhm.
any case, because I think that would be a warning sign to the university, the same way when I read the essay and I said, oh
Right.
my goodness, I think this student's in crisis and he hasn't
Yeah.
even left home yet. Um, with that said, most of the time, a student may try an essay topic and it doesn't work. And then they may come up with another idea and try a second one. I have a student of mine now that is working with an essay coach that I work with. And they did a brainstorming session and she wrote one of the essays and she told me about it and she said, I don't feel like this is giving enough aspects of my personality. And I'd like to try this other topic that I brainstormed. And so I said to her, well, try and write it and see how it goes. And then you're meeting with the essay coach and you could share both versions
Mhm.
and decide what you think is the best topic. Sometimes it takes more than one iteration. Some
Mhm.
students will write the whole thing and it's easy breezy and it just needs a little editing. Some students didn't get all of those writing skills in high school. And so it's definitely a little bit more time intensive with the editing. Some students are more hands off with that part and they're more open to your suggestions. Some students will, come back every single word they want to think about and
Right.
really like take time to think about. So I don't know if I answered your
No,
actual
no, no,
question,
no.
but that's, how the essay kind of goes. What I do recommend is that for rising seniors that if they are home over the summer, that they get that personal statement done by
Sooner rather
before
than later.
August 1st. Yes, I would have that done in June or July and my list of schools done and my everything on the Common App that's not school specific. So the essay being one of the biggest things to get out of the way before school starts,
Right.
especially because you're going to have with the supplements another, depending on the schools that you apply to, you could have 10 to 20 supplemental essays to write.
And how soon can they start working on the Common App? Does it open
So
a certain day or?
so the Common App opens August 1st. However, you can do the tab in the Common App. There's multiple tabs, and there's a tab for the schoolwork for the colleges. And then there's a tab called Common App, which is the one that's like your name and your address and your demographic information and your parents' information and your activity list. And you can do everything in that tab before August 1st, because there will be no updates to that tab. All of those updates are already done. The school specific information is not live until August 1st and can change at that point. I had a student last year whose school had him put in his schools, and we were working on his application for Florida State. And then I had another student who we just added the school at the time when we were working together, and there was different questions because the schools changed things. And so we had to remove the school from the Common App for the student and re-add it. And then he had to redo all of the work that he had done over the summer with that school. So I tell my students, don't put anything school specific into the Common App until August 1st. And then August 1st, we can enter in all the schools and get started on the school specific information. Now, there are a couple of schools that open up their own application. Some schools have their own applications on their websites, and you can go directly to them. I typically advise students to stick in the Common App because you're not redoing all this stuff, and it's one place to kind of track everything. But there are some schools that open up earlier if you go the route of applying on their website. So actually, Arizona State University opens up mid-July. And if that's a school that you're interested in and they have rolling admissions, you're better off going on their portal and filling out the application and getting it done there, because you'll find out sooner than waiting till August 1st. The other thing about doing that for schools with rolling admissions would be the time where I would tell you to use the school's website if you prefer, because you're then getting your application in a one-off submission. The way the Common App works is they send a batch of applications at a time. So your student is in a batch of 10,000 students versus getting the one application from the school. So it used to be with UCF, I would advise all of my students to do it that way. But when they switched last year to have this priority deadline and early action and everything changed there, I just have them do it through the Common App now. But there are instances where the school specific application would be a better idea.
Gotcha. All right. Well, this was super helpful. Oh my, we thank you.
I don't know if I made more and had left you all with more questions than answers.
Information. Yes. And so those of you who would like to reach out to Stephanie, her business is SO College Ready. I love that because I just put two and two together. That SO is also Stephanie Ordet, SO. So love that.
Right.
Love that. All right. So what is the best way for a parent or a student to reach out to you if they're interested in talking or having a consultation?
So
well, thank you for having me. This was great. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And as always, thank you to our listeners for listening. Have a great one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.